your house. So when people come to buy that house, they go, wow, we don't have to do anything, the landscape's already here. And that's worth to us about 10%. It increases the value by that much. So, various TV shows, things like, the latest fashion is a Tuscan garden, or the latest fashion is a Balinese garden, or this garden or that garden. The problem is, by the time your garden's matured, the next fashion has come by, and your garden then lowers in value because it's no longer fashionable. So avoid fashion, and actually just look at where you live, and use that to inspire you. So, be inspired by the city you live in. Melbourne gardens are very different to Sydney gardens or Brisbane gardens. So think about what you love about where you live, and allow that to inspire you. Then look at your street and your community. What do you love about that? What do you love about your house? And the architecture, or maybe it's the light level. So if you love lots of light coming in through those northern windows, then design around that light. Allow that light to inspire you. Don't put trees there. Put them somewhere else to shade you from light that potentially you don't like. So the next one is balance between the elements. What I'm talking about here is balance between hard landscaping like paving and deck and even swimming pools, and balance between soft landscaping like plant, trees, shrubs, even lawn. So why do you think that's important? It makes the place more livable and then more usable. So most of us think very differently from the person next to us. Some people are incredibly practical and other people are incredibly romantic, and everyone is sort of somewhere in between. Most people are somewhere in between. So a really practical person will think, okay, well if a small deck is a little bit practical, then a big deck must be incredibly practical. So let's have the biggest deck possible. Now a romantic person will say, well if a few plants gives me that emotional connection, if a few plants makes me feel at home and connected with my garden, then we'll fill the whole garden with plants. And you know what? Both people are wrong. When it comes to adding value, you want a balance between the planted element or the romantic emotional connection element and the practical element, like the paving, the deck, even the swimming pool. So let's play a little game. Which do you prefer? I'll get out of the way. Do you prefer the pool on this pool or that pool? Ooh. Yesterday we did actually have someone wanting this one, and they're probably a very practically minded person. But most people, they see that as being a nice place to hang out. Even if it's not your style, there's a balance of elements. What about this one? Which do you prefer? So we have a few romantics in the room, because this is a much more romantic garden. So those who are a little bit more practical will still lean to this. So again, even though we're balancing between the elements, some gardens will be slightly more romantic than others. So it's up to you. You need to design your garden based on who you are. And again, which do you prefer? And this one's a little bit more indecisive because this is quite a formal garden, but there's still a balance. Lots of green, balance with paving, balance with the swimming pool, and then this one here as we had earlier. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about future-proofing and space planning, and this is an area where almost everyone forgets about it. Do you realise that most gardens that are built today will only last 10 years? And that's because all they're thinking about is the now. What are their needs right now? However, if you're going to sell your house in 10 years' time, you don't want your garden to be in decline just as you're about to sell it. You want your garden to look its best, or it's at least still look as valuable as possible. What if this is your forever home and you're going to live here for 25, 30 years? You don't want to redesign your garden every 10 years. So you need to think about things like, why is this important? Because it allows the garden to increase in value over time, which I've just mentioned. So ask yourself these questions, and perhaps some other questions. Will the kids be using all that lawn when they're moody teenagers? How will you share the space with your adult children when they refuse to leave home? And also, when you finally become empty nesters, how are you going to use that space? And a very good example is something like a trampoline. You only really use a trampoline for about maybe 5 years of the kid's life. So will that trampoline space be turned into something else at a later date? Will it become the fire pit area for the moody teenagers to sit around? Another way to look at future-proofing and space planning is avoiding dead space. There's always sort of these areas in gardens where people think, oh, we aren't going to use that. It's not practical, so we won't actually landscape it. We won't worry about that. But remembering that there's also an emotional connection to the garden. So if you give everything a use, then the whole garden will become your playground, a space to go. Even those weird, narrow passages down the side of the house, they should still be landscaped. They shouldn't be forgotten. And then finally, earlier on I was talking about honest design. There's also this idea of honest materials, and honest materials are what they say they are. They're not trying to be something they're not. So they're things like timber, gravel, rock, steel, concrete, various types of, so concrete that's looking like concrete, I'll get to that in a second, and things like clay, so clay bricks. So avoiding things like fake grass. So fake grass won't age well over time. Pressed or patterned concrete, so concrete that has a veneer of something else over the top, so concrete that's trying to look like clay pavers, for example. Eventually that surface wears off and it becomes quite patchy. So if your garden's going to last more than 5 years, avoid those sorts of things. And some painted finishes also don't last very long. So rethink the idea of painting certain surfaces. Maybe you can allow them to be raw steel, for example, and allow them to rust naturally. So the honest materials age gracefully. They have a bit of a patina to them. They'll last the lifetime of your garden if you choose them well and you install them well. So I'm just going to give you a little example of a fairly typical design for me. So the green bit is the existing house, the white bit is the extension. The blue bit is what the architect gave me. So the client said to the architect, I want a fire pit, I want a swimming pool, I want a barbecue area. And then the green bit, that's the landscape. Just sort of throw that towards the landscaper, the landscape designer. Now, to me, that green place is dead space. It doesn't matter what I do in that space, it actually probably won't be that usable. And the people in the room that have children will say, yes, but we have children. Children like lawn. But we know that children prefer to play in close proximity to trusted adults. So if there's nothing down here for the adults to enjoy, children will use that space less. So if you're wanting to use it more and have it more part of your life, you need to have things down here that you're actually going to draw your attention, draw yourself down into that space. So this will basically remain dead space. There's not much I could do with that. So this was my solution. And luckily, this hadn't gone through council yet, so I did have opportunity to change things around. Now, in the other solution, the fire pit was down here. The people sitting there were either going to be looking at a brick wall or just going to be looking at the paling fence and not at the people they were going to be cooking for. And the swimming pool was here, and it was sort of confined into like a pig pen kind of shape. So what I did was move the swimming pool down here and associate the fire pit with it. So that extends the life of this area. A swimming pool in Melbourne typically will only be used for about 3 months of the year. Add a fire pit there, and then you've got the 3 months either side of that summer period also covered. The green space in the middle gives you emotional connection to everything in the garden. So wherever you are, you feel and see this green space. By moving the barbecue area slightly further in, this person barbecuing can now be surrounded by green space, so he feels better, but also he can see his family that he's barbecuing for. So connect, spreading things out and putting green space in between those spaces, it makes the space much more usable because you're going to enjoy using it. And then down here there's a courtyard. At the moment they're children's bedrooms, so this is where the trampoline's going to go. But when they become moody teenagers, this will be their hangout, their own private little courtyard. Interestingly, the client liked this idea so much that they've now kicked the children out of these bedrooms. The children are now going to live in the old part of the house, and this room here is now one large parents' retreat because they like the idea of having their own courtyard. Now again, for those who are designing their garden at the same time as